Hello everyone and welcome back to the den. Today I am canning pork, and right now I am about to I have my broth going right now. I'll show you. Well, here's my broth, just chicken broth. It's about a gallon of water, about 4 small to medium sized onions, and probably 6 cloves of garlic, along with, it is a gallon, like I said, it's a gallon of water, but I used 8 bouillon cubes chicken bouillon cubes, and I'm just letting that kind of come together, and then I'm going to add the pork to it, and I'm going to let it cook for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to can it. So the next step that I have to do is cut the pork. I got a pork shoulder here. I'm going to cut all the fat parts off of it and add that to the broth, and then we're just going to put it all in the jars and can it in the pressure canner. So I'll see you once I get all this cut. Okay, so I just got my pork trimmed. That is a lot of work, I'll be honest, but it's a cut of meat that's cheap, so you're going to have a pretty good fat content in there. I tried to pull away, that's already starting to brown, that's why that looks like that. There is quite a bit of marbling of fat and just fat in general on a pork shoulder, so you're just going to have fat. So now I'm going to let this cook in here. I'm not going to cook it all the way through. It doesn't need to be cooked all the way through. Basically just heated all the way through, and then I'm going to right now get the pork mess cleaned up and clean up all my jars, and then once I get all that done, it'll be about that time to start loading my jars and getting them ready for the canner. Okay, so while I'm getting these jars ready to get cleaned up, I wanted to just talk about why I'm going to can this pork today and what I'm going to use it for. I'm going to can pork because if I want to make tamales or pulled pork sandwiches, actually my kids just like to eat shredded pork. You can make tacos with it, anything that you would want, you know, like a pulled pork for, you can use this recipe for. And I chose the pork shoulder because, or the Boston butt, because it's cheap, and right now with inflation and things, it's really expensive to go to the grocery store. So I'm trying to combat high prices by putting some meats on the shelf that are going to be shelf stable. I already have, you know, a lot. If you haven't seen my canning raw chicken video, you can check that out. I'll put a card in the video right now up here. You can check that one out. I have a few things. Let's see. I also have a canning chicken soup base. You can do a lot with that recipe, actually. We usually make like a chicken and rice type stew with it, and it feeds a lot of people. It's an excellent starting point to make a meal that will really, if you add quite a bit of rice to it, which I know if you don't like rice, then I guess you could add noodles, but it's a good starting point, and you can really add to it to make a lot of food. So you can check that video out too. It'll be really nice to have some pork on the shelf and to add to our, you know, canned meats already, and to add to just our long-term food storage, because if prices continue to go up, which I do believe they will, then this will be an excellent addition to our pantry. All right, so here's my pork. Here's what it looks like. I just let it cook for about half an hour. You see the onions in there. Ooh, steamy. It's very hot, obviously. Just steamed up my lens. I'm not sure how many pints I'm going to get out of this, and I am going to do pints because it just gives me, like with my raw chicken, it just gives me, the pints will just give me more options. I can do lunch or I can do dinner. If I do dinner, I might have to do 2, most likely 2, but that's fine. I'd rather, like I said in my canning raw chicken video, I'd rather do 2 cans instead of 1 quart and be having leftovers that we may or may not eat. So let's get this jarred up. All right, so here's my jar. I'm going to use my funnel, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get as much pork in the pint as possible. I'll move this over. And then after I get the pork in, then I'm gonna ladle in my broth. And you're gonna leave a 1-inch headspace on this. Alright, so I'm going to call this amount good. It's pretty close to the top, and I'm going to fill it with broth. Now this is somewhat cooked already, so that's going to be pretty good on the fill there. So let me get my spoon and my ladle here for the broth. Like I said, you're looking for a 1-inch headspace, so about that bottom line of your jar. Alright, so that one looks good. I'm going to continue with the rest of these jars, and I'll come back and show you what step is next. Okay, so I ended up with only 6 pints of meat and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pints of broth. I would have liked to have gotten a lot more meat out of this, but again, it's a very, very fatty cut. I started off with a 10-pound Boston butt and ended up with 6 pints of meat. Right now I'm taking my vinegar towel. I'm going to wipe all the rims, and then you're just going to wipe around the rim of the jar. Just make sure also at the same time that there's no cracks, no chips. Make sure that you use vinegar because you want to cut. This is a fatty. I can see the fat resting already at the tops of these jars. So you want to make sure that you get a good seal. So you want to make sure that you're cutting that fat. And the way to do that is to use vinegar. So that's what I'm doing now. I've already debubbled these. When I was messing with these, trying to get these pork chunks in here, I went ahead and debubbled all of them to try and squeeze as much as I could in there. So they are all debubbled and ready to go. And if you don't know how to debubble, basically you're just going to take, I'll do one real fast. Take your debubbler, any type of tool that's not, you don't want to use metal if you don't have to, and you just run it around the sides. Again, in my canning raw chicken one, I do it in that one too, and you go down the middle and you just make sure that your headspace stays the same, because you might lose liquid. You might, there might be air trapped in here in these chunks. You might have liquid that drops down. You want to make sure that your liquid is at the 1-inch headspace line, okay? And that your meat stays down around that area too. All right. And then we're wiping our rims. And I'm actually going to turn this and get a little bit more vinegar just because this, like I said, is pretty fatty. So if you were doing like fruits, like I just did a canning session with blueberries, you wouldn't have to worry about using vinegar. You could just use water. But because this is going to have a fat content in it, you definitely want to use vinegar. All right. So, and also, like I said, checking for chips, nicks, anything that would cause the seal to fail, cause it to not seal at all. You want to be checking for those, because any kind of chip can cause that vacuum that you're trying to create when it's sealing to not form. Anytime that I have jars that get chipped or nicked, we just use them as glass like cups in the cabinet. You can put your berries from the fridge into the jar and put them in the fridge. That's how I store my extra blueberries, is I put them in a quart-sized mason jar in the fridge with the lid on. So you can use one of your chipped jars if you have any of those for something like that. All right, so next step is lids and rings. With these lids, same with the jars. I just washed the lids and rings with hot soapy water. There's no need to sanitize your jars. And after I washed my jars, I just set them to the side on a towel and let them air dry. These are going to go in a pressure canner, so you do not have to worry about sanitizing them. USDA guideline says that you just need to wash with hot soapy water and then dry. Okay, so I'm going to get the lids and rings on, and I'll show one here for you. This is my, it looked like there was still stuff on the rim, but I think it's just vinegar. You set this on here, and then get your ring, and you're just going to go finger tight. Okay, finger tight. Don't use your wrist, don't use your elbow grease, just finger tight. So as tight as your little fingers will get them. Okay, I'm going to finish these up, and then I'll bring you back when it's time to put them in the canner. All right, so here's my canner, 23 quart Presto canner. I have it on about medium-ish heat. It's steaming, it's warm, those jars, the liquid inside is hot, so we're gonna be around the same temperature of the jars going into the temperature of the water. Okay, so I'm gonna start loading my canner. Get that where I want it. And I'm going to do 7 on the bottom layer and 6 on the top. These jars are hot too. Ooh, so is the canner. All right, now if you did not have a rack for your second layer, you can stagger, which would look like this, right? But I do have a rack. It's actually, I'm glad I have the rack there. Makes it easier than staggering. Just set it in there, and then just place your next layer of jars. Now I'm going to put my lid on my canner. There's arrows on this one. Your canner may be different, but this, like I said, the 23 quart Presto, and there's arrows on the lid and there's arrows on the handle here. You just line those up. Making sure all my, you want to make sure that you can see through this valve too. And I didn't do that yet, so I'm just going to make sure I can. So you want to line those up and then twist it into place. And then this is your regulator, but we're not going to need this yet because this is going to have to vent before we can add our weight. Every canner is different, so just make sure that you are ready with the knowledge of how your canner works. This one takes 3 quarts of water. That's what was in the bottom. I know that can be confusing. How much water do I put in my canner? Every canner is different, so you just have to make sure that, like I said, you know how to work your specific canner. So right now, all I'm gonna do is turn this to a medium heat, just a little bit higher than it already was. And eventually this is gonna come to a vent, okay? Now, this hole here, this vent pipe right here will start to vent out steam. Once that comes to a vent, we're gonna count the clock for 10 minutes. It has to be a pretty steady vent. Like you'll start to notice some coming out little bits like puff puff, you know? But you want it to be a good steady vent before you start your timer, because you wanna replace the air inside your canner with steam, and the only way to do that is to vent out all the air so that all of that in there is steam. That's all that's left, okay? So right now, that's what I'm gonna wait for, and I will bring you back as soon as it starts to vent. All right, so we are at the vent stage now. It is hard to see on here, but it is venting steady vent. It's really hard to see. Let's see if I can get a better shot here. It looks like it's only puffing out smoke, but it's actually venting pretty solidly. So you'll be able to tell once you see the vent. It'll be a full kind of plume of steam coming up. You can feel it. Once you get to that point, you want to set your timer for 10 minutes. Okay, so we have done our full vent for 10 minutes. If you can see and hear it, it's still venting, but it's just, you know, going to keep blowing out steam. So at this point now, you're going to take your weight and you're going to put it on the top of your vent pipe. And now what you're doing at this point is waiting for your canner to build pressure. Now this little valve back here popped up, so you know that now it's building pressure, okay? So for me, I need this to be at least 13 pounds of pressure. So right now we're at, I don't know, 2 or so. So I'm just gonna let this do its thing and keep an eye on it. That's what you need to do. Keep an eye on it. And once you get to your pressure for your elevation, then you can start your countdown for the time that they process. And these are quarts, or I'm sorry, these are pints. So we're gonna be doing 75 minutes today. So as soon as this dial gets up to 13, then I can start my timer, but not until then. Okay, so when this dial gets to 13, I'll come back. Okay, so I can hear the weight starting to rock a little bit. Mine only rocks when it gets to 15 or more. So I knew that it was at pressure. So I have reduced my heat down to about here. Here's medium, so right in here. And I'll probably have to go ahead and reduce that more. I'll just keep an eye on my gauge, but as you can see, right now it's right in between 14 and 15, and that's where I'll probably try to keep it. That is where I'll try to keep it. It's really hard to keep it. Like if you're worried about keeping it right on 13, don't worry about that. You can go a little bit more than that, and it'll be just fine. Just don't let it go below whatever your pressure should be. So if your pressure is 11, don't let it go past that, and you know, less than that. Just always keep it 11 or more. For me, mine's 13. I'm gonna keep it between 13 and 15. If it starts to get higher than 15, this will start to rock, and I'll just, you know, watch my temperatures. For some reason, my stove is very unreliable when it comes to, you know, the heat staying constant. So I can't leave my pressure canner. I have to stay in the same area with it, just to make sure that it doesn't get too high in pressure or too low. So that is it. I am going to start my timer now, and I'm going to set it for 75 minutes, and then after that we will come back. Alright, so now my timer has gone off, the 75 minutes is up, and all you're going to do now is turn your heat off and wait for this gauge to go down to 0. And when I get to that point, I will come back. Okay, so I have turned off the heat in the last segment, and now my pressure is down to 0, and my valve in the back has dropped back there. So next step you want to do is remove your weight. Okay, it looks good. There's nothing coming out. So I'm going to let this sit just a few more minutes, and then I'm going to take the lid off. Okay, so now I'm going to take my lid off. It's going to be hot. Steam is still going to be in this because it just came down off of pressure, but it's still going to be very, very hot. So when you remove the lid, make sure to remove it away from you. Like you want to lift it from this part back here up, so that way the steam will come out that way. And then as you're moving your lid, that steam coming up will be hot, so you want to do it quick. Alright, so I'm going to set my lid down here. And then this is what it looks like inside. They're still bubbling pretty good, so I'm just going to let them sit. Okay, so all I'm going to do after this is I'm just going to lift them out. I'm going to set them over here on my towel. And then I'll let them sit there all night long. And then tomorrow I'll take the bands off, make sure they sealed. If none sealed, I'll stick it in the fridge and we'll use it within the next couple days. So what I'll do is I'll just remove the bands and wash them really good, and then I will put them on my shelf. And like I said, I've canned chicken before, and you know, I've canned all these raw meats before, but it's nice to have a variety of canned meats on your shelf. So, you know, I have ground beef on the shelf that I've canned, I have chicken, I have my chicken base, all kinds of fruits and vegetables, and this pork will be just an excellent way to help my long-term food storage bulk up, but also have extra variety. So having all kinds of meats on the shelf is just an awesome way to, I would think, combat some of the inflation that's going on, because you can buy at prices that are right now, even though they are more than what they might have been a year ago, but who knows what they're going to be in a year. So canning is an excellent way to get stuff on your shelf, help you with your food budget throughout the year, and to know that you're going to have a variety of different foods that your family already loves. You don't have to compromise. You know everyone's going to eat it. It's just an excellent way to bulk up your long-term storage. So I'm excited about this. I'm happy. I can't wait to use some of this stuff, especially the broth, and I think it will be great. It'll be a great addition for our pantry. So if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It really helps out a lot, and I really appreciate it, and give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.